Not all journeys begin with thunder. Some start in quiet moments beneath starry skies, where forgotten paths wait to be discovered. If you enjoy gentle quests and soft magic, like and subscribe for more bedtime stories. The brass bell above the crooked door of the archive rang out with a hollow clang, shivering through the dust-thick air like the memory of sound. Valen looked up from the fractured rune he had been mending, his fingers still tangled in silver thread. The forge had long grown cold, his fire with it, but some habits died slow. The stranger standing at the threshold bore the colors of the crown, storm-gray robes stitched with white flame, and a sigil brooch shaped like a broken crown. "Valen Arcane?" the man asked, voice dry as the parchment around them. "You are summoned." Valen blinked, resisting the instinct to melt into shadow. A summons from the palace was never a blessing, not for a disgraced apprentice who had once tried to reforge a forbidden memory. He stood, wiping his hands, eyes narrowing. "The king still remembers me?" The messenger's gaze did not flinch. "Barely. And that's precisely the problem." They traveled in silence, through the hollow streets where nothing was ever built but everything decayed. The sky was overcast with veined clouds, like ancient vellum. Valen watched them with unease. The palace spires rose in the distance, glinting with faint pulses of gold, once fueled by the king's strongest memories, now flickering like dying embers. "Why now?" Valen asked finally. The man did not answer immediately. "The king's mind fades," he said. "And with it, the enchantments that hold the realm intact. No one can reach him anymore. His thoughts drift like ash. We've called the best Memorysmiths. None can trace what he's lost." He glanced at Valen. "But you've always heard what others couldn't." Valen said nothing, but deep in his gut, the old ache returned, of voices lost, of fragments echoing in the dark. He hadn't asked to be different. But the past, it seemed, was never done with him. The throne room was colder than Valen remembered, not in temperature but in spirit. High arches carved with memory glyphs were dulled, their gleams stripped like forgotten names. On the throne sat King Aerith, a hollow man in robes too grand for his brittle frame. His eyes stared past the present, locked in a realm where time had frayed. Around him, court mages whispered in low tones, and memory keepers hovered with empty vessels meant to draw lingering echoes. None dared approach. Until Valen did. "Your Majesty," he said, voice steady despite the weight in his chest. The king did not respond. Valen stepped closer, ignoring the murmurs, and knelt. "Do you remember the queen?" The air thickened. The king's fingers twitched. A breath, slow and ragged, escaped his lips. Then, just barely, his eyes met Valen's. And something old and shattered screamed to life. They called it the echo. Not quite a memory, not yet a thought. It vibrated in the air like thunder trapped beneath ice. Valen felt it hum through his bones, pulling him toward the king's left hand, where no ring now rested. There, in the space between loss and silence, he heard the first whisper. "Find me." Valen staggered back, his breath ragged. "He's buried it deep," he murmured, blinking through the days. "Not in memory, but in grief." The court mages exchanged wary glances. One, older and robed in ink-dyed silk, stepped forward. "Then you must find what he buried," she said, "before his grief takes him entirely. We believe it lies in the shattered coast." Valen's eyes widened. "That place is a graveyard of broken minds." "Precisely," she replied. "Where else would a king hide the part of himself he feared most?" That night, Valen sat alone in the royal chambers given to him, staring at a map inked with fading lines and voids. The shattered coast. Where discarded memories went to die. Memories too painful, too dangerous, too real. He traced a jagged path with a soot-blackened finger, remembering tales of memory phantoms and echo storms that could rend a mind in two. Yet somewhere in that chaos, the Obsidian Heart waited. The memory the king had forged into stone to lock away his sorrow. Valen whispered to the air, a ritual once used in the archives. "Let me hear you," he said softly. And in the silence, he heard her laughter, faint, ghost-like. The queen's voice. Just one note. But enough. He closed the map. The journey had begun. By dawn, he departed the city astride a pale mare named Teszel, whose memory had been sown with unerring direction. Behind him, the towers dimmed as if in mourning. Ahead lay the bleeding woods, the first barrier. Trees that fed on memories, replacing sap with secrets. As he entered their crimson canopy, he wrapped his own thoughts in wards, whispering false names and false histories so the trees would feed on fiction. Still, he felt tendrils probe his mind. Who are you? What do you carry? He pressed on. A memory leaf brushed his cheek, warm as skin, and he nearly collapsed under a vision not his own, a child left behind in flame. Shaking, he pushed Teszel faster. He could not afford to drown before the coast. 3 days later, he reached the edge of the nameless basin. It was a valley sunk deep into the earth, once a kingdom of song before it sacrificed its past to escape war. Now only echo chambers remained, where the wind wept in harmony. Valen camped on the ridge. He had brought no firewood, only a memory flint, which, when struck, conjured warmth from the recollection of summer suns. As it sparked, he murmured the name of the queen, Alara. The flame that rose was pale violet. Not hers. Not yet. But closer. That night dreams came. Not his own. He stood at the edge of a black shore, obsidian shards cutting the sea, and heard a lullaby. Sleep, my king, sleep, where sorrow cannot tread. He woke with blood on his hands. The dream had cut deep. In the morning, he found a traveler waiting, an old woman cloaked in salt-gray robes, her eyes clouded but sharp. She introduced herself as Mira, a cartomancer who read the winds and tides of memory. You seek the shattered coast, she said without preamble. And the thing the king has tried to forget. Valen nodded. She offered a bone fragment compass. It will not point north, she warned. Only toward loss. Valen accepted it, noting the faint tremor in her hands. You've been there? He asked. She laughed, a brittle sound. Once. I left part of myself behind. Her gaze met his. You will, too. Then she was gone, as if she'd never stood there at all. Only the compass remained, its needle spinning slowly toward the west. The shattered coast appeared not as land, but a wound. A jagged scar along the sea, where cliffs crumbled into black sand and the air itself shimmered with broken recollections. As Valen approached, the sky cracked, a low, thunderous groan that sent spirals of past voices tumbling down. He braced himself. The compass spun violently before fixing in one direction, a spire of stone jutting from the shoreline like a dagger. Around it, phantoms flickered, fragments of memory not fully dead. He heard a soldier's scream, a child's laugh, a lover's whisper, all overlapping, all real. Teszel whinnied and refused to go farther. Valen dismounted, clutching the hilt of his reforger's blade. He would walk the rest alone. With each step toward the spire, the world unraveled. His senses blurred, what he saw shifted, what he heard echoed from childhood. He nearly turned back when a gust of wind brought her voice again. My heart lies buried in glass. Not obsidian. Glass. But glass turned black by fire. The realization struck him like lightning. The obsidian heart wasn't merely sorrow. It was love scorched into permanence. At the spire's base, he found the fragment. A black shard pulsing with faint warmth. He reached for it, and visions exploded. A dance beneath stars. A lullaby sung through tears. A crown placed on his head with trembling fingers. The queen's last breath. He screamed as the flood overtook him. He awoke under the stars, the shard clenched in his hand. Around him, the spire had collapsed, as if its purpose was complete. The memories still seared his mind, but he held them, not as torment, but as truth. The queen had given her love freely, and the king had buried it to survive. But love buried too deep becomes rot. Valen wrapped the shard in silks etched with runes of containment. He would need to reforge it, not as a prison, but as a key. The king must feel it again, not remember it, but feel it. And survive. He turned toward the path home, knowing that the hardest part was not finding the Obsidian Heart. It was convincing the king to take it back. As he crossed the threshold of the shattered coast, the air behind him stilled. No phantoms chased him now. Only silence remained, a silence pregnant with truth. Tezel waited, patient and loyal. He mounted her, casting one final glance behind. Somewhere in the echoing dark, he had found the memory meant to save the realm. But grief was a blade with two edges. And the kingdom's fate now hinged not on magic, nor might, but whether a broken king could endure his own sorrow. As they rode into the growing night, Valen felt the shard pulse softly in his satchel, like a heartbeat returned. He would return to the palace. He would reforge what was broken. And the king would remember. The path back to the capital was longer than Valen remembered, as though time itself had bent under the weight of what he carried. The shard throbbed faintly inside the rune-wrapped satchel at his hip, and every so often it hummed, not with song or speech, but with raw sensation, a tightness behind the ribs, a welling in the throat, the ache of absence. Tezel moved cautiously, her hooves silent upon the dew-laced ground, and even the birds in the trees above seemed to avoid song. At night, Valen dared not light his memory flint. Fire drawn from emotion felt treacherous now, liable to spark more than warmth. So he sat in the dark, clutching the shard, whispering to it. He loved her. Enough to bury himself. The wind didn't answer, but the shard grew warm in his palm. In this quiet, a smith began his work not with tools, but with understanding. 2 days out from the city, the world shifted. Trees bent the wrong way. Shadows lengthened during the day. Time tangled, the hours skipping like scratched records. Valen knew this place. The Forgetting Fields. Once a sanctuary for aging minds, now a garden of thought run wild. The grass whispered names he didn't know, and the air tasted like forgotten dreams. He wrapped his head in linen, muting sound, and trudged forward. A dozen Memorysmiths had vanished here over the years, their minds unspooled by overgrown recollections. The shard pulsed in warning, and Valen gritted his teeth. Not this time. He dropped a silver nail into the dirt, a marker forged from his first success, a memory of pride and fear. It anchored him. The field recoiled. By sundown, he emerged, winded but intact, leaving only silence in his wake. The palace gates loomed as he approached, more guarded now than ever. The spires, once gold-lit and graceful, stood brittle and gray. The enchantments that strengthened their foundations flickered weakly, reacting to the king's vanishing thoughts. Valen showed no sigil but held the shard up high, and at its glow, the sentries parted without question. Inside, the court awaited, not with cheers or jeers, but with tense, silent dread. The High Mage approached him first. "Did you find it?" Valen nodded. She reached for the satchel, but he stepped back. "It's not just an object. It's feeling, weight, memory, all woven. To reforge it, I must do it myself." The hall murmured, displeased. "You are unlicensed." Someone spat. "You are disgraced." Valen looked toward the throne. "And yet the king waits for me." They gave him the old forge beneath the palace, a cavernous hall built of obsidian brick and lined with memory conduits. In its prime, it had birthed wonders, swords that remembered each swing, cloaks that whispered warnings from past dangers, rings that preserved vows even after death. Now, it was cold and dim. Valen stood before the anvil, the shard resting upon it, black as midnight. "You were once his heart," he whispered. "You remember what he cannot bear." Around him, candles flickered to life, each flame drawn from a memory flint inscribed with fragments of grief. The king's last dance with Alara, the moment she smiled in the garden, the final breath she exhaled. The flames wept. Valen began his work. He struck the shard not with force, but resonance. Using tuning hammers etched with emotion scripts, he coaxed the buried pain into the open. Each strike evoked a fragment. A song half remembered. A name spoken with reverence. A scream that echoed across centuries. The shard cracked, bled violet light, and then held firm. The pendant pulsed once, then dimmed. The king's hand hovered over it, trembling. All waited, breathless. And then, he pulled back. "No," he rasped. "It hurts." Valen's chest tightened. "Yes," he whispered. "It should." The court erupted. Advisors shouted. Mages flinched. One memory keeper tried to snatch the pendant away. But Valen stood fast. "You built this kingdom on memories, my king! And now it dies because you refuse your own." The king's gaze hardened. "I lost her." "You buried her," Valen corrected. "And with her, the best of yourself." Silence rang like a bell. The king looked away, and the shard glowed faintly, sensing his sorrow stir. "Then let it break me," he whispered. "Let me grieve." He reached for the pendant. The moment it touched his chest, the room shuddered. Magic unraveled in golden spirals from the king's crown, threading into the rafters, the stones, the people. Gasps rang out. Some fell to their knees. The throne cracked down its center, not destroyed, but changed. The glyphs etched into the walls flared to life. Words lost now returned. "Alara, my dawn, my heart." The king wept, not in weakness but in storm. And as the memory engulfed him, the palace shook. Outside, the spires rekindled, their glow fierce and bright. Trees blossomed. Rivers cleared. But within the king, war raged. He clutched the pendant, sobbing, breaking, burning. Valen stood close, ready to catch him should he fall. It took hours. At times, the king screamed as if a blade carved him from within. Other times, he whispered lullabies, stroking the air as if Alara stood beside him. None dared interfere. Not even Valen. The healing had begun, and it was a cruel mercy. As dawn breached the windows, the king collapsed, eyes shut but breathing steady. The pendant no longer pulsed, it glowed softly, like an ember banked. Valen approached and knelt. "Is he alive?" said the high mage, eyes wet. "And whole." The room exhaled. A kingdom restored by a memory once lost. But peace was not yet won. Later, in private, the king summoned Valen. His voice was raw, but his eyes held fire. "You gave me back what I feared most," he said. "And in doing so, you gave me choice." Valen bowed. "What will you do with it, your majesty?" Aerith turned to the window, watching the light return to his kingdom. "Lead as I should have. Grief does not weaken us. It proves we lived." He placed a hand on Valen's shoulder. "But you have done more than restore me. You've walked where no sane mind dares. I would not send you again unless..." He paused. "There are still other wounds. Older. Buried beneath the kingdom itself. If we are to truly heal, we must unearth them." Valen's heart sank. Another quest. But he nodded. "Where must I go?" The king reached into a sealed vault beneath the throne and withdrew a scroll bound with blood ribbon. "Long ago, before even Alara's time, a pact was made. A sacrifice buried beneath the hollow mountains. It fueled the first enchantments, built our walls, shaped our laws. But it came at a price." He handed the scroll to Valen. "That sacrifice was never meant to be forgotten. And yet we let it fade. Now it festers. Its memory bleeds into the land. You must find it. And you must remember it." Valen accepted the scroll. Another wound. Another buried truth. "Then I go east," he said. "To the hollow mountains." "Yes," the king said. "And this time, you won't go alone." At the palace gates, a figure waited. Mira, the cartomancer. Her robes fluttered in a breeze that spoke of deep roads and darker truths. Beside her stood a boy of no more than 12, eyes silver with ancestral sight. "He sees what was," Mira said. "I see what might be. And you walk the line between." Valen felt the weight of the pendant in his satchel, its echo still warm. "Then let us find the next wound." As the trio stepped onto the path eastward, dawn glowed behind them, bright and watchful. The kingdom had remembered. But the land itself still wept. And beneath the hollow mountains, the oldest sorrow waited. The hollow mountains loomed on the horizon like sleeping giants, their peaks veiled in mist and silence. As Valen, Mira, and the silver-eyed boy named Cale approached, the air thickened, not with magic, but with memory long suppressed. The path was littered with ancient stones, some carved with runes that no longer spoke, others blank as forgotten names. Valen held the scroll tightly in his hand, its blood-red ribbon pulsing faintly, guiding them toward the buried wound. Cale walked ahead, barefoot and unflinching, his gaze distant, as if he watched a world beneath the one they walked. He sees echoes, Mira had explained. Not memories. Not yet. Just what clings. Valen nodded. He had learned to trust what couldn't be easily explained. The mountains awaited, and with them, truths older than the kingdom itself. Their first night beneath the mountains brought dreams. Not gentle ones. Valen saw a woman cloaked in ash standing atop a burning stair, her hands raised in blessing or warning. Her voice was a song made of bone. Mira spoke in her sleep, whispering numbers. 3. 13. 1 undone. Cale cried out once, but would not say why. When Valen lit the memory flint, the fire burned blue, regret, old, and sharp. He unrolled the scroll, scanning the king's words, the pact of foundation. Made in shadow. Blood exchanged for protection. The obsidian wall rose, and our enemies vanished. But the cost had never been recorded. Not in ink. Only in forgetting. Beneath the mountains, that sacrifice still stirred. And it was no longer content to be ignored. They found the first marker at the mouth of a crevice lined with iron dust. A massive stone wheel, half buried in shale, carved with a single sigil, a closed eye. As they stepped closer, the wheel turned, ancient and groaning, revealing a stairway descending into black. Cale trembled but said nothing. Valen placed a hand on his shoulder. You don't have to see what's down there. Cale looked up at him, eyes shimmering silver. I already do. The descent began. With each step, the air grew heavier, thick with unsaid truths. The torches they lit cast long, twisted shadows, and the deeper they went, the more the stone around them changed. Obsidian veins streaked through the walls like cracks in sanity. Mira touched one and gasped. This stone, it's weeping. The chamber at the bottom was vast and hollow, a cathedral carved into the heart of the earth. Stalactites hung like jagged teeth, and in the center stood an altar of black glass. Surrounding it were statues, 12 figures hooded and blindfolded, arms extended in a ring. Their faces were expressionless, their bodies lifelike in unsettling detail. Mira approached the altar. This was where the pact was made, she whispered. A sacrifice of memory of self. Valen stepped closer and touched the altar. A pulse shot through him, images, sensations, screams. He saw the early kings kneeling before the figures, offering blood not from their veins, but from their minds. Entire lives burned away to birth walls of protection, cities of enchantment. They gave away their pasts, he muttered, to build the future. Cale began to hum, a soft, eerie tune that echoed strangely in the chamber. The statues trembled. One by one, their arms lowered, palms now open. A gust of wind blew from nowhere, circling the trio. The altar flared with light, revealing an inscription hidden beneath centuries of dust. When the 13th returns, the pact will fracture. Valen counted the statues. 12. Myra's voice was barely a whisper. There was a 13th. Cale stopped humming. And it was broken. The ground shook. From behind the altar, a passage opened, narrow and deep, exhaling cold air. Valen felt the shard pendant in his satchel pulse faintly, as if recognizing something kin. That's where it waits, he said. The forgotten one. The cost never paid. The narrow passage forced them to walk single file, walls scraping against their shoulders. As they moved, voices whispered, not words, but raw feelings, betrayal, sorrow, silence. Myra's lantern flickered. We're in the fracture, she murmured. The place memory fled. Cale staggered once, catching himself on the wall. Someone's here, he said. Valen tightened his grip on the pendant. The passage ended in a chamber smaller than the one before but no less grand. A single statue stood in the center, taller than the rest, its face shattered, its arms bound in chains of etched obsidian. Valen stepped forward. The 13th. The pendant pulsed, and the chains groaned. Whatever had been bound was waking. Without warning, the room exploded with vision. Not light. Not sound. But memory. All three were thrown to the floor. Valen felt the years unravel around him. He stood in a court of fire, watching a woman, robed, fierce, bleeding from the eyes, shouting at the 12. "You bind the land with lies," she cried. "You pay with forgetting. But what of the soul?" The others looked away. "She was the conscience," Mira gasped. "She refused the pact." Cale wept silently. "They buried her." The statue before them pulsed, the chains cracking. "She gave herself," Valen realized. "Not to fuel magic, but to stop it. And in doing so, she became the wound. The memory never meant to heal. Until now." The statue's heart split. A shard emerged, white, not black. Smooth as bone, but pulsing with a rhythm Valen recognized. A memory of refusal. Of truth. He reached out. The moment his fingers brushed it, pain erupted, not his, but hers. All her rage, her sorrow, her despair at a kingdom choosing power over conscience. Valen fell to his knees. Mira screamed. Cale stood frozen, eyes blank. "She's showing us everything," Valen choked out. "What they erased." A vision swelled in the chamber, the 12, sealing her away, whispering oaths never written. Let her be forgotten. Let her protests vanish. Let only the pact remain. The white shard burned with defiance. "She didn't die," Mira said, stunned. "She became the memory." Cale stepped forward, his small hand outstretched. The shard floated between them, and Cale's silver eyes locked onto Valen's. "She wants to live again," he said. "But not as a statue. As truth." Valen nodded. "Then we bring her back." He placed the white shard beside the black pendant in his satchel. The moment they touched, light flared, black and white, sorrow and defiance merging. The statue crumbled, freed at last. In the silence that followed, a voice spoke, not aloud, but in the mind of all three travelers. "Thank you." Then the wind changed. The mountain above trembled. The pact was breaking. They fled as the cavern collapsed, stone groaning, echoes screaming. The stairway shattered behind them, but the wheel at the surface opened once more, letting them escape into dim, early dawn. The sky above the hollow mountains churned with gold and ash. Valen collapsed on the grass, breathing hard, the satchel at his side glowing faintly. Mira sat beside him, shaking. "You did more than retrieve memory," she whispered. "You resurrected justice." Cale stood at the edge of the path, eyes fixed on the eastern horizon. "She's not done," he said. "Others were silenced. Other truths buried." Valen nodded. "Then our path isn't over." Back at the palace, the skies were clear, the obsidian spires gleaming. Yet beneath the brightness, tension brewed. When Valen presented the white shard to the king, Aerith went pale. She was real? And sacrificed," Valen said. "To protect a lie." The king stared at the shard for a long time, then at Valen. "This kingdom was built on power stolen from its own soul. Then we must return what we took," Valen replied. "Even if it breaks us again." The king's hand trembled as he touched the shard. "Begin preparations," he said. "We must call a convergence. All who carry magic must learn the truth." Valen nodded. Truth was a heavier magic. But it was the only kind that endured. That night, Valen stood at the edge of the palace gardens, the black pendant and white shard suspended before him, tethered by runes of binding and balance. Together, they spun slowly, light and dark in harmony. Cale watched in silence. "What happens now?" he asked. Valen stared into the sky. "We follow the trail of what was lost." "And if we find more pain?" Mira asked from behind. Valen turned. "Then we give it form. We name it. And we learn from it." The Obsidian Heart beat quietly beside the Shard of Conscience, and in their rhythm, a new path began, one not of forgetting, but of remembrance. The mountains were behind them, but the road of truth stretched far ahead. The trail led them westward now, through hills dusted in silver pine and valleys where silence grew thick as moss. After the hollow mountains, everything seemed too still. But Valen knew better, stillness could be deceptive. The black pendant and white shard hung together around his neck now, bound by a braid of memory thread he'd spun himself. They no longer pulsed violently. Instead, they breathed. The kingdom was beginning to remember, fragments of buried truths rising in the minds of dreamers and elders. Yet Mira warned him as they passed into the edge of an ancient glade. There are memories older than the palace, older than the pact, hidden in places too stubborn to forget and too proud to speak. Valen nodded. That place was their destination, the forest of forgotten kings. Cale had grown quieter since the hollow mountains. His silver eyes still glimmered when he stared at the wind, but now his voice came only in murmurs. They sleep beneath trees, he whispered once, clutching Myra's cloak. But they're not dead. Not really. The forest welcomed them without sound. No birdsong, no leaf rustle. Just air dense with unspoken oaths. The path narrowed quickly, swallowed by roots and ivy, until they could walk no more than two abreast. Trees loomed with bark as black as obsidian and leaves that shimmered like glass in moonlight. This is where kings come to be forgotten, Mira said. Or to forget themselves. Valen touched one tree, and for a heartbeat, heard a crown fall in a storm. Memory grew wild here, unshaped and raw. Deeper into the forest, they found monuments made of memory stone, pillars with shifting carvings that showed different scenes depending on who looked. Mira saw a boy crowned with flame. Cale saw a man weeping over an empty cradle. Valen saw a familiar face, his master, Geron, the Memorysmith who'd banished him. The image wavered, then showed Geron's trembling hands forging a blade made of a child's first laugh. He gave too much of himself, Valen murmured. And lost what made him kind. The pillar cracked slightly. Truth, once seen, could not be hidden. Around them, more statues began to stir, not move, but shift. The forest was listening. It hadn't forgotten. It had simply waited. At the forest center stood a glade with a single tree larger than any Valen had ever seen. Its bark was gold-streaked obsidian, and its roots vanished into the earth like veins. Around it were 12 stone thrones, all empty. But something lingered. A presence thick with age. As Valen approached, the pendant and shard began to tremble, only slightly, but enough to draw a thin ribbon of light from the soil. Cale gasped. They're here, he whispered. The kings that came before. All of them. Mira knelt before the tree, tracing the roots with her fingers. This is not just a burial ground, she said. It's a vault. Each throne held a memory, a crown, a story, but all were gone. Lost, hidden, or stolen. Then came the voices. Not loud, not sharp. Just soft echoes drifting between leaves like wine through broken instruments. Valen closed his eyes, letting them in. One whispered, I was the king who let the river dry. Another, I burned the forest to light the warpath. A third sobbed, I forgot my daughter's name. Regret. That was what lingered here. Not power. Not command. But the aching remnants of decisions made and paths walked in loneliness. Valen stepped to the thrones, touching one. The voice inside it was clearer than the rest. Tell my story, or let me fade. He bowed his head. I will tell them all. The forest held its breath. From the base of the great tree rose a figure, not a ghost, but a memory given shape. An old king in armor dulled by time, a crown of bone resting upon his brow. His eyes were milky with years, but his voice carried weight. You carry both pain and defiance, he said to Valen. The heart and the conscience. Few have borne both. Valen nodded. But not enough to heal the land. The king looked to the tree. There was one more. A memory buried too deep. One we tore from ourselves in shame. Mira stood slowly. The mad crown. The king's gaze dropped. Not mad. Merely honest. He saw what power would make of us. And so we locked his memory in the hollow grove. He pointed toward a shadowed path. Bring him back, and the forest may speak freely again. The hollow grove was unlike the rest of the forest. Its trees had no leaves, only strands of fog clinging to barren limbs. The air was still, but beneath it churned a sound like breathing rock. Kale walked slower here. He's angry, the boy said. But not at us. At the center of the grove was a pit lined with roots, and within it, a throne of splintered gold. A crown rested on it, not of metal, but woven tears hardened into glass. As Valen stepped closer, a vision seized him, the mad crown pacing in a moonlit chamber, warning the council of the pack's cost. You cannot burn the soul and call it progress, he had shouted. And when they laughed, he had laughed too, long and bitterly. Then vanished. The pit drew Valen closer, each step heavier than the last. Mira whispered. He locked himself away. Made himself a warning. Not a weapon. Valen nodded. Then we honor him by remembering. He reached out, touching the glass crown. The moment his fingers closed around it, the ground heaved. A figure burst from the shadows, tall, cloaked in writhing roots, with a voice like thunder. I told them. It bellowed. I told them, and they laughed. Valen held up the white shard. We listened. The figure froze. Then stepped closer. You carry her truth. He looked to the black pendant. And his grief. A long pause. Then you are worthy. The roots recoiled, and the pit flooded with golden light. The forgotten king was free. As the light faded, the grove changed. Leaves bloomed where fog had clung. The dead trees straightened. Kale smiled. He remembers now. The crown turned to ash in Valen's palm, its burden lifted. Mira touched his arm. That's 3, she whispered. 3 wounds healed. But how many left? Valen looked up at the sky, moonlight filtering through reborn branches. Enough to break the kingdom again. Or remake it. When they returned to the thrones, the 12 now held shapes, faint, flickering memories of each forgotten king. The old figure nodded. You gave him back. And now we give you this. From the tree's hollow, a seed rose, silver, veined with black and white. Plant it where lies still rule. Let it grow truth. The seed pulsed faintly in Valen's hand. He tucked it carefully beside the pendant and shard. The black of grief. The white of protest. The silver of rebirth. As they left the forest, the trees seemed to lean inward, whispering farewells. Kale waved once. They're watching, he said. They want us to succeed. Mira smiled sadly. Then we mustn't fail. Outside the glade, the world felt too loud. Birds sang, wind howled, and the light felt sharp after so much twilight. But Valen walked steadily, his burden growing heavier only in meaning. They made camp in a clearing beside a mirrored lake. That night, Valen dreamed not of pain, but of a sapling blooming in stone. The next morning, they found themselves watched, not by kings or ghosts, but by a woman in armor marked with dust and rust. She introduced herself as Reyna, a knight of the southern fiefdoms. I followed your trail, she said. Strange things happen where you walk. Rivers that flow backward. Birds that speak. A blind man in Rothermere cried your name in his sleep. Valen frowned. We've only just begun. Reyna nodded. And yet the land already answers. She carried a map, crude but marked with dark blotches spreading outward from the capital. Corruption, she explained. Buried truths fighting to be known. Valen pointed to a mark near the sea. There. That's next. Mira read the name etched faintly beneath it. The Drowned Archive. They set out by midday, Reyna now among them, her sword ringing softly with old oaths. Kale rode beside Valen, humming again. Mira, quiet as always, watched the wind. The road would be long, the seas harsh, and the archive drowned by its own secrets. But Valen no longer feared the weight of memory. He had carried grief, given voice to protest, and planted a seed of remembrance. The land stirred beneath their feet. Magic shimmered in unnatural currents, reacting to wounds opened and stitched. And ahead, beneath waves and wreckage, a library of drowned knowledge awaited, its truths swollen and warped, its shelves whispering, begging to be heard. The quest for healing continued, and the Obsidian Heart still beat. The journey to the coast was veiled in rain. Not the heavy, thundering storms of spring, but a constant misting drizzle that turned roads to ribbon mud and blurred the boundaries between land and sea. Valen wrapped his cloak tighter, though no chill could pierce the warmth pulsing at his chest. The black pendant, the white shard, and the silver seed whispered faintly, like a heartbeat muffled in deep water. Reyna led them along crumbling stone roads, half swallowed by creeping roots and pale vines. "The land here forgets," she said. "And what it forgets, the sea claims." Mira kept close to Kale, whose humming had grown strange, low, uneven, as though he echoed something far away. The coastal wind carried strange echoes, too, words spoken backward, names that didn't belong to anyone living. They arrived at dusk, when the tide was lowest and the ruins of the archive revealed their broken teeth. Once a fortress library of white granite and obsidian glass, it had been swallowed a century ago in the final days of the Memory Wars. Now, half its towers leaned askew beneath the waves, and the rest stood slick with barnacles and ghost lichen. Seagulls cried from jagged arches, and below the surface, books bound in salt leather flickered like fish. "How do we enter?" Valen asked. Mira pointed to a spire that jutted from the sea like a finger. "We wait for the tide's breath. It exhales every night, just before moonrise. That's when the archive remembers how to breathe," Reyna scoffed. "And we dive into a corpse's lungs," Kale only said. "It dreams of ink." At moonrise, the sea receded in a long, shuddering breath. Not entirely. A tide like this was unnatural, shaped by the memory magic that had once protected the archive. A narrow stone bridge emerged, slick with seaweed and scattered with shells that pulsed faintly with light. The group crossed one by one, Reyna testing each step with her blade. At the gate, they found a door of coral and glass, sealed by a lock that shimmered between languages. Valen approached it with the shard raised. "Let me in," he whispered. The lock melted into mist, and the door sighed open. Inside was darkness, not absence, but compressed memory, thick as ink. "Don't speak," Mira warned. "Words echo here." Kale nodded. "And echoes drown." Inside, the archive pulsed with forgotten thought. Columns of stone and kelp rose into shadow, and walls were carved with scripts that flickered and crawled. No torches burned, yet the space glowed with a sickly light, memory light, emitted by books that bled through their bindings. Every book here had once been a soul's truth, carved from thought and sealed in sea glass. But time had warped them. Many muttered nonsense. Others wept. One tome throbbed like a wound. Valen approached it and saw a child scrawl across the cover. "Please don't forget me." Mira held him back. "Not yet," she said. "We need the Heart's Codex. That's why we're here." The Codex was the first book ever written with memory thread, crafted by the first archivist, lost when the sea took this place. They moved carefully through the stacks, each step stirring ink-colored fog. Statues loomed in the corners, guardians of thought, though most had crumbled. As they reached the lower halls, a sound grew louder. Whispers, endless and tangled, rising from below. The archive's vault. "It's still reading itself," Kale murmured. "It never stopped." Reyna kept her hand on her sword, though she knew it would be useless against what dwelled here. They descended a spiral stair carved into bone, arriving at a round chamber whose walls were covered in writing that shifted like tides. In the center was a dais, and upon it, the Heart's Codex, shimmering, half open, its pages wet with seawater that never dripped. Valen stepped forward, but the book spoke. "Not yet," it said. "You have not earned me." The chamber shuddered, and a form rose from the ink mist, tall, cloaked in pages, its face blank as parchment. It was the librarian, a memory construct left to protect the codex. To read the heart, you must surrender yours, it intoned. A truth freely given. A wound you do not hide. Valen stood silent. Mira stepped beside him. He's already given so much, she said. His name, his exile, his hope. The librarian did not move. And yet the deepest wound remains buried. Cale tugged Valen's hand. Show him. Valen breathed deep. Then reached into his cloak and pulled forth a tiny scrap of memory thread, one he'd hidden even from Mira. It shimmered with flame and the sound of a lullaby. My brother, he said. I let him die. The librarian tilted its head. Truth acknowledged. Pain shared. The thread vanished, and the codex opened wide, pages fluttering without wind. Light spilled from it, not warm, but clear, like starlight on frost. Valen stepped forward, touching its words. They burned into his mind, not painfully, but with precision. He saw the first pact, written by firelight and bound in wax. He saw the Obsidian Heart forged, not from stone, but from the final breath of a dying king. He saw the day the heart shattered, not by accident, but by will, because one memory was too dangerous to keep. What was it? Mira asked. Valen answered, voice hollow. The name of undoing. A word that breaks all bonds, even between land and soul. They took the codex, though it wept as they closed it. I remember too much, it whispered. And yet not enough. As they ascended, the archive began to collapse, not violently, but with the slow sorrow of a story ending. Books turned to salt. Statues bowed their heads. The sea began to return. They reached the surface as the bridge vanished behind them. Reyna looked back once. It's drowning again. Valen nodded. But it gave us what we needed. Mira held the codex to her chest. Now we know what was taken. Cale looked to the horizon. The name of undoing, he repeated. Who has it? Valen's voice was iron. Whoever broke the heart. They traveled inland once more, this time through broken farmlands where wheat grew in spirals and cows spoke dreams aloud. Magic here was wild, unanchored, leaking from old rifts in memory. Reyna fought off a wolf made of pages. Mira calmed a storm by reciting a lullaby in reverse. Cale sang a song that made a tree bloom words instead of leaves. Valen studied the codex nightly, learning how memory could be weapon and healing both. He saw diagrams for memory-smithing tools lost to time, and blueprints for the vault that had once housed the heart. It wasn't just a stone, he said one evening. It was a seed. One meant to grow truth. That's why it was buried. Mira nodded. And why someone wanted it broken. Weeks passed. They reached the city of Lyran, once the capital of the southern marches, now reduced to quiet streets and sealed temples. There, in the Hall of Broken Oaths, they found an old woman waiting. She called herself the Keeper of the Hollow Tongue. I spoke the name once, she said, in the days when the pact first cracked. I have forgotten it, but my bones still remember how it felt. She touched Valen's hand. You must not speak it, even when you learn it. Valen frowned. But it may be the only way to sever the corruption. The Keeper shook her head. Or to sever the land from its soul entirely. Use it only when all else fails. She handed him a vial of gray liquid. Ink of ending. It will write the word once. No more. With the codex, the vial, and the seed, their burden grew heavier. But so did their clarity. The path ahead led to the Scorched Vale, once the kingdom's crown, now a wasteland where the last king died screaming. Reyna spoke little of it. Mira grew quiet. Cale no longer sang. Valen pressed forward, one step at a time. We must find the final piece, he said. The heart's cradle. For the Obsidian Heart, they now understood, had not been merely shattered. It had been divided. 3 parts, grief, protest, and truth. Grief hung from Valen's neck. Protest burned in the shard. Truth waited in the veil, or in what remained of it. The final test, the final reckoning. That night, Beneath a sky stitched with stars, Valen dreamed of a garden in the middle of ash. Flowers bloomed where fire had danced. A throne stood empty, and beside it, a girl with hair of shadow held out a black stone. "You have come far," she said. "But the path is not a circle. It is a spiral." Valen asked her name, but she vanished with the dawn. When he awoke, Cale stood watch, humming a tune no one else could hear. Mira read the codex in silence. Reyna sharpened her blade. And ahead, beyond the hills, a heat shimmered, not of sunlight, but of memory burning to be born anew. The scorched veil called them, and the Obsidian Heart still beat. The land changed as they neared the scorched veil, not suddenly, but like waking from a dream where every shape starts to blur. Grass became brittle underfoot. Stones bled rust. The very wind seemed singed, carrying the sharp scent of forgotten fire. Valen felt it first, a slow pressure at his chest, as if the pendant he wore sensed the nearness of its kin. Mira read from the codex, murmuring words of warding, but even she faltered as they crossed into the boundary marked by obsidian stakes and ash banners. Reyna drew her sword without prompting. "This is where kings are unmade," she said quietly. Cale stopped humming. Even the soil here refused to echo. It was memoryless ground, burnt clean, or burned hollow. The scorched veil was a basin of broken majesty. Once, it had been the kingdom's heartland, where spring festivals were held beneath blossom trees and kings were crowned beside fountains of gold-veined stone. Now nothing moved. Towers lay half-melted, their windows like weeping eyes. Statues had cracked into bowing shapes, and murals once filled with color now flaked into pale scars. A dry river split the basin in two, blackened bones tangled in its bed. Mira closed the codex with a trembling hand. "The last king fell here," she said. "But he didn't die alone." Cale's gaze followed a trail of scorched footprints that led nowhere. "The land mourns him still. It mourns everything." Valen tightened his grip on the shard. "Then let's find what he tried to hide." They followed a path of black stone toward the ruined palace, a skeletal hall with no roof and pillars that reached like ribs toward the sky. The floor was a mosaic, cracked and half-buried, depicting the Obsidian Heart not as a gem, but a tree rooted in shadow and light. At its base, 3 figures knelt, one cloaked in sorrow, one cloaked in flame, and one cloaked in stars. Valen stepped to the center, where the tree's roots split. The pendant on his chest grew heavy. "The heart was buried here," he whispered. Mira nodded. "This is the cradle." Reyna crouched beside a shattered throne. "He tried to protect it. But someone else came first." The ground beneath them throbbed. "And they left something behind." A tremor split the air, not through the earth, but through time itself. The palace shimmered, then stilled, and standing before them was a figure not of flesh, but memory. He wore royal armor scorched black, and in his hand was a blade of smoke. His crown was broken. "I am King Theon," the echo said. "And I have failed." Mira stepped back. "It's his final memory." The king turned his hollow gaze on Valen. "You seek the heart. You seek to mend what was shattered. But will you bear what I buried?" Valen swallowed. "I will." Theon raised his sword, and the world around them blurred, not disappearing, but rewinding. They stood in the same hall, but now restored. Light poured through stained glass. Music echoed from unseen halls. Courtiers laughed, dancers spun. In the center stood the heart, whole and pulsing, a stone blacker than night, veined with gold. Theon stood beside it, younger, unbroken. "The heart remembers all," he said. "And when it saw what I would become, I broke it." Valen reached out, but his hand passed through the vision. Theon turned. "It was not meant to be a weapon. But I saw war coming. Betrayal. So I tried to use it. And in doing so, I let the name in." The codex shimmered. Mira whispered. "He spoke the name of undoing." Cale shivered. "He undid himself." The memory turned to ash. The vision darkened, and the true palace returned, ruined, gutted, silent. But at its center now stood a pedestal, and upon it, the third piece, A shard not black like the pendant or pale like the splinter, but clear, like glass. Valen stepped forward, and the piece hummed as he approached. "Truth," he said. "This is what was buried." He touched it, and the world surged. For a heartbeat he saw the heart whole, grief, protest, truth, spinning like a galaxy of loss. Then it shattered again, and the glass shard settled into his palm. The three pieces pulsed in unison. Cale staggered. "It's awake," he whispered. "The heart is waking." With all three fragments gathered, the air thickened. Shadows lengthened, and from the far end of the palace, something stirred. A gate formed in the stone, a circular doorway that shimmered like smoke held in silver lines. "The vault," Mira breathed. "The place where the heart was kept before the king broke it." Valen turned. "Then that's where we go." But Reyna hesitated. "There's something else here." She pointed to the mosaic beneath their feet. The roots of the heart's tree glowed faintly, pulsing in time with the shards. Cale stepped forward, singing a single pure note. The stone parted, revealing a stair spiraling downward. "One last truth," he said. "Buried deeper than memory." They descended into the earth, the stair narrowing until they moved single file. The walls whispered in forgotten languages. The air was thick with pressure, like a storm waiting to burst. At the bottom was a chamber lit by no flame, yet bright as dawn. In its center stood a pool of silver ink, still, perfect. Around it, 3 thrones faced inward, empty. Upon the walls were carvings, the creation of the heart, the founding of the pact, the silent sundering of a bond that once held the world together. Mira knelt by the pool. "This is the world's memory," she said. "Unfiltered. Untouched. If we enter, it will show us everything." Reyna grimaced. "Even what we don't want to see." Valen nodded. "Especially that." One by one, they stepped into the ink. It did not drown them. It welcomed them. And it showed them a time before kings, when the world sang in harmony, and the Obsidian Heart was not a relic, but a being, a living construct of truth given form. It kept the balance between memory and forgetting. It held the name of undoing not as a weapon, but as a safeguard. But humans, afraid of forgetting, bound it, split it, called it stone. The heart wept as it was torn. "We did this," Mira whispered. "We tried to possess memory. To cage what should have been free." Cale began to cry. "And it broke itself rather than let us break everything else." The ink swirled. The vision faded. They emerged changed. No longer seeking just a fix, but understanding the depth of the wound. "The heart doesn't need to be reforged," Mira said. "It needs to be released." Reyna frowned. "But then the name might escape too." Valen looked at the 3 fragments, now joined in a silver triad at his chest. "Unless we give it something stronger than fear to bind to." Cale tilted his head. "Like what?" Valen's eyes burned with resolve. "Hope. Shared memory. A promise that cannot be broken." Mira reached for the codex. "There is a right. The right of returning. But it requires a memory given freely by each of us. One we'd rather never lose." Reyna stepped forward. "Then let's give it." Around the silver pool, they began the rite. Mira offered the lullaby her mother once sang, now the only echo of her name. Cale gave his first dream, a vision of flying over fields that never existed. Reyna offered the moment she chose exile over blind loyalty. Valen gave the memory of his brother's laugh. The ink absorbed each gift, glowing with soft, colored light. The fragments at his chest pulsed, and then fused. The Obsidian Heart reformed, not as stone, but as a flame of dark glass, hovering between them. It beat once, twice, and spoke. "I remember." It floated upward, passing through the chamber's ceiling like light through glass. The world shook. Outside, the sky cracked like ice. They ran back to the surface. The veil was no longer dead. The grass shimmered gold. The river flowed again, carrying away ash. The palace stood not whole, but forgiven. In the sky above, the heart pulsed, a star reborn. It's returning, Mira said, weeping. To its place between all things. Valen held the codex close. The name of undoing still exists. But now it is balanced. Kale sang again, and the wind carried it across the hills. Reyna stood tall, blade at her back, watching a world begin to heal. And in the heart's light, they saw a road ahead, not easy, not clean, but open. A road that led beyond the wound. A road toward wholeness. The wind on the shattered coast grew colder as Valen ventured further inland, away from the cliffs and deeper into the realm where even the most fragmented memories refused to dissolve. The sky remained a mottled silver, casting no shadows, only a dull reflection of the anguish embedded in every broken stone. Here, memories no longer whispered, they screamed. Not in words, but in the creak of frost-brittle trees, the thrum of distant thunder, and the faint, ceaseless humming that curled around Valen's spine. His pack carried fragments of salvaged memory, trinkets and tokens imbued with forgotten warmth, but none gave comfort now. This place rejected hope. As he crossed the splintered bridge of bone-white wood, the land opened to reveal a basin littered with obsidian shards, each one pulsing with a weak red glow. He knew, instinctively, that this was the basin of the bound, where grief, sealed too tightly, bled through the cracks of the world. Valen descended carefully, the obsidian fragments whispering not with voices, but with emotions, jagged despair, stilled fury, frozen longing. One shard vibrated beneath his boot and flashed, dragging him into a vision, a battlefield not of war, but of silence. A young king, blood on his lips, cradling a pale woman with hair like firelight. Her crown was shattered beside her. The king's sobs fractured the memory until the vision snapped away, leaving Valen gasping. He dropped to one knee, hand braced on the nearest shard. "So this is where you buried her," he whispered. The king's sorrow hadn't been locked away in some vault. It had been scattered here, seeded into the landscape itself. The Obsidian Heart wasn't a single artifact. It was everywhere. The grief had multiplied, crystallized, rooted into the coast. Valen pressed forward, heart pounding like a war drum. He would need to gather the pieces. But the coast didn't yield its sorrows freely. The first fragment he lifted burned his palms, not with heat but with shame. A vision burst forth again, of the king standing over his son's cradle, turning away. Of ministers pleading, of a hollow crown passed from trembling hand to trembling hand. Valen saw himself reflected in the black glass, and behind him, the echo of his old master, shaking his head. "You abandoned what made you strong." The fragment dissolved in his hand, leaving behind a crackling ember that settled into his memory pouch. Each shard extracted a cost. If Valen wanted to reforge the Obsidian Heart, he would have to carry the king's grief inside his own mind. Night fell without warning. The shattered coast did not observe time. Instead, memory itself dictated the light. In sorrowful moments, dusk lingered. In rage, midday reared hot and sharp. But now, as Valen approached the heart of the basin, the air became still. A silver tree, tall and bare, stood at the center of a black pool. At its roots lay a mirror. Not glass, but obsidian polished so finely it reflected every soul that gazed into it. Valen knelt, compelled by the artifact. The moment his eyes met his reflection, it shifted. He was not himself, but the young king again, hands red with memory, heart sealed away. But then the image morphed. He was Valen again, and behind him, a figure stood cloaked in veils of ash. A woman. The queen? The pool rippled. The figure stepped forward, silent. Her face was lost in haze, but her presence cracked the silence like ice underfoot. She reached down, not toward Valen, but toward the shards he had gathered. One by one, they lifted from his pouch and floated in the air. The queen's fingers danced through them, reassembling a fractured constellation. Each fragment found its twin, its echo, its missing grief. Valen whispered, "Are you showing me the path?" Her silence was answer enough. When the final piece clicked into place, the shards hovered in the shape of a heart, irregular, glinting, but whole. Valen reached toward it, and though he expected pain, it was warmth that met his fingers. The queen faded, but her sorrow remained, pulsing within the obsidian shape. The moment he touched the completed heart, it unraveled, not broken, but transformed. Threads of black light stretched from it, wrapping around Valen's arms and chest, fusing into his memory thread. He gasped as sorrow, ancient and royal, surged into him, every love unspoken, every apology swallowed, every bitter triumph. It did not crush him. It changed him. He stood taller, straighter. His eyes burned with silver light. Around the basin, the obsidian fragments dimmed, their purpose fulfilled. But the heart, now one with Valen, pulsed steadily. He had become the vessel, the forge, the sorrow. He stumbled back, barely aware of his body. The threads still clung to him, trailing like vines of dusk. But he knew now what must be done. The king must be confronted. The obsidian heart was no longer just an artifact. It was a wound, reopened but finally clean. Valen turned toward the path out of the basin. But the land would not let him leave so easily. A storm brewed, one not of wind or water, but of unforgiven memory. The shadows of regret rose like giants, their forms shaped by things unsaid and undone. The king's regrets. The kingdom's losses. The war that never should have been fought. Valen gritted his teeth. "You will not stop me," he growled. He drew the memory thread tight around his wrists like gauntlets and charged. The first shadow fell upon him like a hammer, shrieking with the voice of every soldier forgotten. Valen swung the obsidian thread, and it cut through the shadow, not destroying it, but redeeming it. The pain dissolved into color, then into light. The second shadow was smaller, a child, crown in hand, looking up with wide eyes. Valen paused. This was the prince, the one the king had turned away from. This regret could not be battled. It had to be accepted. Valen knelt and placed a hand on the shadow's chest. The boy wept, then faded, leaving only warmth behind. More shadows came, raging, pleading, silent, but Valen met each one with memory, not steel. Not one regret was discarded. Each was woven into the heart now beating in his chest. When the last shadow bowed and vanished, dawn returned. A true dawn, soft and golden, like the first morning after grief. Valen stood alone at the edge of the basin, eyes stinging not from sorrow but from clarity. The obsidian heart pulsed faintly, and within it, he could feel the queen's love still flickering, like the last star before sunrise. He knew the path back now. The kingdom awaited. But so did its pain. He would not return as a savior. He would return as a mirror, reflecting to the king the truths he had buried. The hardest part still lay ahead. As he climbed the cliffs and left the basin behind, the coast began to shift. The jagged rocks softened into smooth stone. The sky warmed. Trees, once frozen, bloomed faintly with violet buds. Even the air tasted cleaner. The land had not been cursed, it had been wounded. And now, slowly, it healed with him. As he walked, the memory thread unfurled behind him like a trail of stars. He thought of his master, of the boy he had been, and the future he might still shape. For the first time in years, Valen did not fear what came next. He only feared that the king would refuse what had to be accepted. But fear would not stop him. Not anymore. At the border of the shattered coast, a silver gate shimmered into view, woven of moonlight and ink. It was not real in the physical sense, but no less solid. Memory had formed it, and memory could open it. Valen approached, holding the obsidian heart to his chest. The gate pulsed in rhythm, then opened silently. Beyond it lay the old road back to the palace. A wind carried the scent of incense and old parchment. Home. He stepped through, and the gate vanished behind him. The coast was gone. The past could no longer hold him, but its truth would guide him. And so he walked, no longer as an exile, but as a bearer of sorrow. Each step echoed with a truth most feared to face, that grief, when sealed away, festers. But when faced, when felt, it can become something more. It can become strength. The heart in his chest beat on, obsidian, yes, but glowing now from within. And far ahead, in the towers of the crumbling palace, a crown waited. A king waited. A reckoning waited. The old road back to the palace was narrower than Valen remembered. Flanked by hedgerows once proud with royal sigils, now bare and brittle, it wound through fields long since abandoned. In every branch and faded stone, he felt the erosion of memory, the very kingdom worn thin by the king's refusal to remember. Valen walked alone, the Obsidian Heart pulsing faintly within his chest, its rhythm no longer foreign but matched to his own. Travelers once flocked to these roads for counsel, protection, and healing. Now, he saw no one. Not even birds sang. Magic had seeped away like water through broken glass, and all that remained was the dust of forgetting. Still, the wind whispered, "He comes." Whether it was warning or welcome, Valen couldn't say. By dusk, the towers of the palace breached the horizon, silhouetted like the ribs of a dying giant. What was once an ivory beacon atop the city of Lyridon had collapsed into a patchwork of scaffolding, veils, and rot. The gates stood ajar. No guards remained, only statues with hollow eyes and rusted blades. Valen stepped through them as if returning to a dream half-remembered and half-dreaded. A breathless hush fell over the palace courtyard. Then, like a stone dropped in still water, the heart pulsed, just once, and lanterns flickered to life, one by one. The palace recognized him. Or perhaps it recognized what he carried. Inside, the corridors of memory curled and twisted, welcoming and perilous both. Each step forward felt like trespass. Each hall echoed with forgotten names. He passed through the Hall of Sigils, where ancestral banners once waved in ceremonial procession. Now they sagged with mildew and age. He remembered kneeling here as an apprentice, barely old enough to shape his first memory sigil. The master Memorysmith, stern and blind, had taught him how to listen, not to words, but to silence. Valen paused beneath the House of Thorns, Queen Lyri's crest, and the heart within him ached. Her love had been fierce, unyielding, and her death had shattered the king so completely that he'd banished even her memory from the walls. The sigil was the last trace. Valen bowed low, then rose. "I'm bringing her back," he whispered, and the crest flared faintly before fading. He pressed on. In the east wing, he reached the reliquary of crowned memories. A room built of ivory shelves and glass reliquaries, each containing a memory forged into artifact. Or they once did. Now, many cases lay cracked, their contents lost to dust. Those that remained shimmered faintly, a silver goblet etched with the king's coronation vow, a child's slipper worn thin by dancing, a circlet of woven stars from the queen's first festival. Valen's eyes caught on a jagged space in the center shelf, empty, ringed by black soot. That was where the Obsidian Heart had once rested. No longer a relic. Now, it beat inside him. He placed his hand on the empty space and breathed deep. The shelves rattled, and the room whispered, "He waits above." The spiral stairs had grown longer, or perhaps his memories of them had shrunk. He climbed in silence, each turn dragging his legs heavier, not from weariness but from weight. The sorrow he carried had become a gravity of its own. Finally, he reached the king's tower, its door veined with age and sealed not by locks, but by memory. Carved into the wood was the royal seal, a tree with roots of fire. Valen touched it, and the Obsidian Heart pulsed once. The door sighed open, revealing a throne room consumed by twilight. Curtains hung like mourning shrouds, and at the far end, the king sat slumped in his throne, eyes closed, hands limp on the armrests. A crown, dull and cracked, rested beside him. Valen stepped forward. "Your Majesty!" His voice rang through the chamber like the echo of a bell long silent. The king stirred, his eyes opening slowly. They were not blank, but they were dim. "Who calls me from forgetting?" the king murmured. Valen bowed. "One who remembers what you buried." A tremor passed through the throne. "I have buried nothing. All has merely faded." Valen shook his head. "No. You chose to seal it. I carry what you lost." And he placed his hand over his chest, where the Obsidian Heart beat. The air tightened, as if the tower itself inhaled. The king's expression hardened. "I will not wear that pain again. You do not understand its cost." Valen stepped closer. I do. I've carried it. And it hasn't destroyed me. It's made me whole. The king rose, slow and unsteady. I made this kingdom strong by forgetting. Her death would have shattered us. You shattered yourself, Valen answered gently. And the kingdom followed. The king's hands clenched. You presume too much. Then let me show you, Valen said, and extended the heart. Obsidian light surged between them, and the chamber darkened. The walls melted into memory. They stood now in the Queen's garden, years ago. Leary laughed, planting Dream Willow beside the moon pond. The king, younger, smiled, but already the seed of fear grew in his eyes. Don't, the king whispered. Please don't. Valen didn't answer. The memories shifted, Leary in her bed, pale, fading. The king knelt beside her, and her last words, "Remember me fully," fell like dying stars. And then silence. The vision shattered. The king reeled back, eyes wide with salt. No. No, I won't. I can't. Valen caught him before he fell. You already have. The moment you opened your eyes. The king wept, not with abandon, but like a dam cracking. Silent sobs tore through his chest. Valen held him, the obsidian heart between them, now glowing gold at the edges. Grief radiated outward, not crushing, but cleansing. In the silence that followed, even the throne room breathed again. Curtains stirred. Light crept across the floor. And in the king's chest, beneath his ribs, something stirred awake. Not the original heart, perhaps, but something reborn. She's gone, the king whispered. But not forgotten, Valen answered. Never again. The crown lifted itself. Not by magic, but by memory, by permission. It hovered before the king, who reached out slowly, trembling. He set it upon his head, and in that moment, the pulse of the kingdom returned. A low hum, felt in the bones. Beyond the palace, the city stirred. Lanterns lit themselves. The wind changed. The old wards reignited, not as shields, but as beacons. The people, the king murmured. They will see me weak. Valen smiled. They will see you human. The king straightened. Then let them. He stepped down from the dais and stood beside Valen. There is much to repair. Valen nodded. It starts with one step. And they took it, together. Words spread like fire. The king had awakened. The queen's name was spoken again in halls long silenced. Music returned to the market squares. Memorysmiths resumed their craft, not as jailers of emotion, but as healers of history. Valen walked among them, not as a hero, but as a bridge. People left tokens at his doorstep, fragments of their own grief, asking only to be heard. He listened. He remembered. He forged anew. The palace restored the garden of Dream Willow, and there, beneath its bloom, a statue of Leary stood, not weeping, but smiling. The king visited it daily, his silence no longer a cage, but a moment of reverence. Still, the obsidian heart beat within Valen. It had not faded. Nor would it. He understood now, sorrow did not end. It transformed. In quiet moments, he still saw the queen in dreams. Not as a ghost, but as a presence, strong, fiery, enduring. She would not return, but her memory had become the lifeblood of a kingdom once dying. And so, Valen remained near the palace, training a new generation of Memorysmiths. He taught them to listen not for power, but for truth. And he taught them never to fear pain, only to fear forgetting. Seasons passed. The sea returned to the shattered coast, washing away the last shards of sealed grief. Trees grew where none had before. The sky stayed warm. And on a quiet morning, beneath a sky painted with sunrise, Valen walked the palace corridors once more. The king, older now, awaited him by the garden. No words were spoken. None were needed. The heart beat on. Not as a burden, but as a gift. In the moon-silvered corridors of the palace, where once echoes of despair had clung to every stone, a new silence took root, peaceful, expectant, like the hush before a song. Valen walked these halls often now, not in exile or defiance, but in belonging. The Memorysmith's guild, reborn from ruins, had established itself within the palace's western wing. Fires burned again in its forges. Apprentices laughed beneath stained glass depicting tales nearly lost. Valen led them not as a master, but as a reminder that to feel deeply, even to suffer, was to live fully. The Obsidian Heart remained within him, its rhythm now a constant harmony, not a discord. The kingdom breathed again, each heartbeat a step toward healing. But peace, as ever, was temporary. Whispers began in the southern provinces, entire villages vanishing, not to war or sickness, but to forgetting. Travelers returned to cities without memory of where they'd been. Fields were harvested, yet no one could recall planting. Memorysmiths who ventured south brought back fractured recollections, speaking in riddles and dreams. The king summoned Valen to the high tower, and together they pored over old maps and older legends. "It's the Hollow," the king said, voice grim. "The place where memory dies completely. I sealed it once, long ago, before even Lyri's death." Valen frowned. "Why would it stir now?" The king looked westward, past the horizon. "Because something's calling it open. And this time, it doesn't want memories. It wants everything." Valen prepared quickly. The shattered coast had taught him how to walk through sorrow. But this would be a walk through emptiness. The Hollow was no place of grief, no palace of broken joy. It was the echo left behind when all else had faded. To find it, Valen carried nothing save the Obsidian Heart, a strand of Queen Lyri's silver hair bound in glass, and a quill once owned by his first master. Memory anchors. If he forgot even his name, these would call him back. The king offered to send guards, but Valen refused. "Memories are personal," he said. "This battle has to be, too." And so, with only shadows for company, Valen crossed into lands where no song remained. At first, the south looked like any other forgotten countryside, ferns reclaiming stone, ivy devouring signposts. But then he noticed things. Villages that had names once, now marked only by empty arches. Rivers with no reflections. Travelers who greeted him, then blinked and asked who he was 2 minutes later. It was like walking through a place that existed only by habit. He reached a town where no one remembered hunger, yet all starved. A woman clutched a baby and smiled, only for her to turn and forget why she held the child at all. Valen's presence sparked faint recall, the Obsidian Heart briefly restoring what was lost. But the further he walked, the more that presence flickered. The Hollow was drawing near. The Hollow revealed itself at twilight, a stretch of valley where even starlight hesitated. The trees there were colorless, and their branches bore no sound. It wasn't dark, not entirely, but it lacked light. It was not quiet, but it lacked sound. Valen stepped into it like a man walking into a dream half-remembered. The air was thick, not with mist, but with absence. He placed the queen's hair against his chest and murmured his name. "Valen. Son of Mora. Forged of memory. I remember." The words echoed faintly, like ripples against stone. Then the wind answered, though it carried no voice. "Do you?" It was the Hollow, ancient and vast, and it was listening. He walked for hours, or minutes, or years. Time here had no hold. What remained was feeling, or the lack of it. He passed an orchard with no fruit, and yet felt hunger. He walked a road with no path, and yet felt lost. The deeper he ventured, the more his own memories thinned. He forgot faces, then names, then colors. When he paused to breathe, he realized he could no longer remember the shape of the king's voice, or the scent of the queen's garden. Panic clutched him like cold fingers. He clutched the memory anchors. The queen's hair. The master's quill. The Obsidian Heart. He pressed them to his skin, and for a heartbeat, he was whole. The Hollow recoiled. "You cannot stay if you remember," it whispered. "Then I won't stay," Valen answered. At the heart of the Hollow stood a tree with no leaves, no bark, no scent. It was not dead. It had simply never lived. Beneath it, a pool of mirror water shimmered, though it reflected nothing. Valen approached it, feeling his knees shake. Inside the water, he saw the hollow's core, not a monster, not a god. A child. Alone. Crying, though it had no eyes. It looked up at him, and said nothing. Yet Valen felt its grief. It had been born from a forgotten name, an abandoned promise, a sorrow too great to keep and too cruel to destroy. "What are you?" Valen whispered. The child turned its head. "I am what's left when even pain is too much to bear." And it reached out. Valen hesitated, but then stepped forward. The Obsidian Heart pulsed once, stronger than ever. "I won't let you erase what's left of us," he said. "Even sorrow has meaning." The child paused, uncertain. "Will you remember me?" it asked, almost silently. Valen nodded. "Yes. Even you." He reached out and touched the child's face. In that moment, memory surged, not just his, but everyone's. All the sorrow buried across time. Every forgotten mother, every nameless soldier, every joy lost in silence. It all flooded the hollow. The trees screamed with color. The ground wept scent and song. And the child vanished, not in pain, but in peace. The hollow trembled, then cracked. Light poured through the seams. Real light. Memory light. The pool shimmered, then broke like glass, releasing a tide of remembrance. Across the Southlands, names returned. Faces found themselves in mirrors again. Laughter, real laughter, erupted from villages that had forgotten what joy sounded like. The hollow collapsed, not with violence, but with grace, like a wound finally stitching closed. Valen stood at the center of it, the Obsidian Heart glowing so brightly now it lit the sky. And in that brightness, he heard the child's last whisper, "Thank you." Valen returned not as a stranger, but as a keeper. The people remembered him without asking. Children ran to him bearing stories they had once forgotten. Elders wept when their names returned. The king embraced him before the entire court, no longer as subject to sovereign, but as one Memorysmith to another. "You've saved more than a kingdom," the king said. "You've saved meaning itself." And Valen, weary but whole, bowed deeply. "I only held the light," he replied. The people brought it home. Months passed. The hollow was studied, then sealed. Not hidden, never again, but guarded, so that forgetting would never fester in silence. The Memorysmith Guild established shrines of remembrance across the realm. People came not only to grieve, but to celebrate, to remember. Valen's teachings spread beyond borders. Other kingdoms sent emissaries to learn the craft. The world, long asleep in comfortless forgetting, began to stir. And everywhere he went, the Obsidian Heart beat, not as sorrow, but as song. On the eve of the Queen's Remembrance Day, the palace was alight. Lanterns floated over the Dream Willow Garden, each carrying a name once lost. Valen stood beside the king, watching the sky fill with flickering fire. "There's still one more journey," the king said quietly. Valen nodded. "The last." The king smiled. "Then let's walk it together." The heart pulsed once, steady as a star. And somewhere far away, the hollow dreamed no more. The palace bells chimed 12 times at dusk, not as alarm nor as celebration, but as invocation. Tonight was the Remembrance Crossing, the last rite the king would walk, guided by Valen. The kingdom's people lined the streets, holding memory lanterns etched with names of those they had once forgotten and now cherished anew. The air was thick with candle smoke and quiet tears, and yet the stillness carried no sorrow. It was gratitude that clung to the stones now. Valen stood at the head of the procession, the Obsidian Heart pressed against his chest. The king followed close behind, walking not as a sovereign, but as a man returning to wholeness. This would not be a farewell of absence, it would be a return of presence. The ceremony led them down the path of echoes, a hidden corridor of stone carved beneath the palace centuries ago, its walls inscribed with memories saved by generations of Memorysmiths. The moment Valen stepped inside, whispers began to flutter around him, threads of remembered lullabies, laughter, final words once spoken at bedside. The king's breath trembled beside him. "I feared I would never be whole again," he murmured. Valen reached back, touching his shoulder. You were always whole. You just buried part of yourself to survive. The king nodded. And now, I wish to unbury all of it. Even if it breaks me. Valen offered no reply, for there was no comfort in truth, but there was strength. At the end of the corridor, they emerged into the Heartstone chamber. The floor was carved from volcanic glass, the very foundation beneath the palace, veined with ancient memory light. Here, the Obsidian Heart was forged. Here, it would return. Valen knelt and placed it at the center of the circle, where the king's sigil pulsed faintly in the crystal. You sealed your grief into this, Valen said. Now you must receive it back. The king knelt beside him, trembling. And if I break? Valen looked into his eyes. Then you will break open. And in that breaking, the kingdom will bloom. The king nodded once. Then he reached out and placed his hand over the heart. The chamber darkened. The sigil beneath them flared like a waking sun. For a moment, all air fled the room. The heart pulsed once, twice, then burst open in a bloom of shadow and flame. From it spilled memory, not in pieces, but as a tide. The king cried out, not in agony, but recognition, as he saw her. Queen Lyri. Standing amid the obsidian light, her eyes shimmering with tears he had once locked away. You left me, he whispered. I did, she replied, her voice shaped from memory. But only in body. I was always with you. You just wouldn't look. He fell to his knees, weeping. Valen stepped back. This was not his moment. This was for the king, and the queen, and the heart they had once shared. The vision grew. From the heart rose scenes, memories long entombed. Lyri in the dream willow garden, spinning stories from stardust. Lyri at war, binding wounds with hands that trembled but never stopped. Lyri on her final day, holding the king's hand as she smiled and said, Do not forget me to survive. Remember me to live. Each vision poured into the king, and though he sobbed as though breaking, a light grew around him. He was not being destroyed. He was being restored. The chamber sang with memory, the walls weeping gold. And Valen, watching, felt the kingdom itself shift. Foundations mended. Magic bloomed. The land would not fall. The curse of the fading was ending. When the vision faded, the king lay still. For a long moment, Valen feared he had passed. But then the man stirred, lifting his head with a gaze neither shattered nor shaken, but still. I remember everything, he whispered. And I am not afraid. Valen helped him rise. The heart now rested in fragments, no longer obsidian, but crystal, clear and warm, humming with peace. Then the heart has fulfilled its purpose, Valen said. The king placed a hand on his chest. No, he replied. We have. And as they ascended the steps back to the palace, dawn rose over the realm, each ray of sunlight carrying the warmth of memory reclaimed. Weeks passed. Seasons turned. The kingdom, no longer crumbling from forgetfulness, now remembered even what it had lost. Forgotten traditions returned. Ancient songs were sung once more. People told stories not only of joy, but of sorrow, and in that balance, found healing. Memorysmiths were called to every corner of the realm, not to hide pain, but to help others shape it into meaning. Valen became known as the first Rekeeper, a new title born from old truth. Memory, even when painful, was sacred. In every village, shrines rose, not to gods or kings, but to names. Names remembered. Names spoken aloud, so they would never be lost again. Valen kept the crystal shards of the heart, not as trophies, but as tools. He melted one into the foundation of the guild hall. Another he gave to the king, who wore it in a pendant near his heart. A third he gave to a child born during the final night of the hollow's collapse, a girl named Lyri, whose eyes shimmered like the queen's and whose voice, when she laughed, made even shadows pause. The last shard, Valen kept for himself. He carved it into a stylus for writing. Each story he penned carried the echo of the Obsidian Heart. He wrote not for kings, nor legend, but for those who feared forgetting. Memory, he wrote. is the first magic. And the last? One evening, Valen returned to the shattered coast, not as a wanderer, but as a pilgrim. The land, once made of broken grief, now shimmered faintly with color. Flowers grew where pain had once clung. The memory storms had passed. He sat upon a rock and lit a lantern. Inside it, he placed a single slip of paper. I remember. The wind caught it, carrying the light far across the waves. For all who came before, Valen whispered. For all who'll come after. He closed his eyes. No more silence. Only song. The king ruled not in grandeur, but in grace. His reign became one of balance, celebration and mourning, joy and remembrance. On the anniversary of Lyri's death, he spoke to the people, not from a balcony, but from the garden where she once told stories. I grieved in silence for too long, he said. But silence is not strength. Remembering is. The people lit lanterns, thousands of them, floating like stars over the capital. Each bore a name. Each bore a promise, you are not forgotten. Valen aged, but never dimmed. He taught new Memorysmiths, trained in sorrow and song. He told them, we are not menders. We are mirrors. We reflect the truth, no matter how heavy. And when he finally retired, the guild held a remembrance feast. Stories were shared, not just of his feats, but of his failures, too. He smiled. You've learned well, he said. To remember everything, even the messy parts, is to live fully. He spent his final years in the Queen's old library, now renamed the Hall of Kept Names. And when his time came, Valen was not buried in stone, but in memory. His stylus, carved from the Obsidian Heart, was passed on to a young apprentice. His name was etched on the palace lantern, which glowed each night above the capital. And somewhere, in the stillness between stars and sleep, a whisper could be heard. I remember. And always would.